Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Employee to Boss podcast. I am Hayleigh Hayhurst, a podcast producer and owner of Espresso Podcast Production. Today, I wanted to talk about something that I hear a lot of people who want to start a podcast struggling with, and that is choosing a topic for your podcast. So, this quarter, till the end of the year, I'm helping a lot of people launch their shows. I'm running a special on my podcast launch program, and so it's $200 off for me to start your podcast for you, which is a killer savings. And so I've been talking to a lot of people who want to start a podcast and have wanted to start a podcast for quite a while now. What I always hear is you may have like a general idea in mind for the podcast that you want to start, but that's all that it is. It's just a general idea. So choosing a topic to talk about can be daunting. When I was starting my podcast, I was trying to decide if I should start a podcast about podcasting or how to start a podcast. But what I ultimately decided was I wanted it to be a little more broad, but still niche. And so I interview business owners who have podcasts and talk to them about how they started their business, but also how they use their podcast for marketing. So I'm going to give you 5 tips for choosing a podcast topic. And this will work for any industry. I mainly work with business owners, businesswomen to be specific. And so really, that's who I have in mind when I came up with this list, but it could work for anyone, any lifestyle, any industry. So just keep it in mind that this will work for you. So first of all, if you're listening to this episode and you want to start a podcast, congratulations. That's really the first step, is telling yourself that you want one. And so there's so many things that come with starting a podcast. And that's why most people hire me, because they want to outsource, the editing, the tech side, all of those fun things. But I mean, fun for me, not fun for most people. But what really lies on my clients' responsibilities is choosing a topic and, making that a solid decision. Because once they have the topic in mind, then we can, off to the races with creating that podcast graphic, creating your marketing, finding your podcast music, all of those really fun things that a lot of people do enjoy, the creative side of it. And so what I find holds a lot of people back is this, because, choosing a name for your podcast, of course, you can change it. My guest last week did change her podcast name after a couple months of doing her podcast, but it was still early on. But honestly, like, your podcast name shouldn't change. The topic can change a little bit, and the artwork and music and all of the assets can always change. So let's get right into this. If you have any questions on this, send me a message on Instagram, Espresso Podcast Production, or email me. It's hello@espressopodcastproduction.com. And I can help you with this because, like I said, I'm helping so many people launch their podcast till the end of the year. So then they can have a podcast that they've been talking about for years finally start in 2023. Because if you've been talking about starting a podcast over and over, it's probably been a year now, maybe longer. And so it's the time to do it. So number 1 tip, which is a big one, and I would really recommend journaling on this or talking to someone about this or talking to yourself about this, but get clear on the experience that you want to actually give your listeners. This is a big one. So if you want to have your listeners just enjoy your podcast, get a little bit deeper. Do you want them to laugh? Do you want them to learn something? What do you want them to learn? What do you want them to think after listening to every episode? And what will keep them coming back for more? That's super important because, of course, you're starting this podcast for yourself, but you want listeners. And so think about the actual experience that they should have after listening to you. For instance, if you are a marketing agency, maybe you're starting a marketing podcast, but that's so broad. That's one of the things that we're going to talk about. You don't want to be too broad, but you could maybe do, like they learn one marketing technique for female entrepreneurs every time they listen to your episode, or something more specific like that. So what experience do you want to give your listeners? The second tip is think about what you talk about all the time. Think about what conversations you seem to be having with your clients, your friends, your family. What do you talk about so often that you want to start a podcast on it? For instance, one of the things that I always say, and you will see this on my Instagram, probably in some of my episodes, but it's a sentence that I continuously say, that's you are what makes your podcast special. Your podcast is special because of you. And so I could definitely create some podcast content on that. And it could be about like expressing yourself, confidence, using your voice, how to do your podcast marketing, but all around that one topic. And so think about what you say all the time. You probably have those sentences or words that you repeat. So think about that. The next tip number 3 I have for you is do not be afraid to niche down too much, because there's literally an audience for every topic. If you wanted to start a podcast for maybe men who do gardening in the Pacific Northwest, there's going to be an audience for that. And I'm here in the Pacific Northwest, so I can guarantee you it's going to be a big audience. And so think about like things like that. Do not be afraid to niche down too much, because there will be an audience for you. And honestly, the more niche you can actually get, the better it will be for you, because you will attract that exact audience that you have in mind. The next tip I have for you goes along with this. On the other hand, do not be too broad, because this is honestly the death of podcasts. You will attract very few people if your topic is just friends having conversations. Who is going to listen to that? Who cares? They don't know you or your friends. What are they going to learn? What are they going to take away? What is their experience going to be? And so, what is their actual experience going to be? What are they going to learn from you? Be niche. Do not be afraid to be niche. Be afraid to be too broad. And the fifth and final tip I have for you is remember, your podcast is here for you to have fun. So create something that you can imagine doing for years and years and years to come. Another thing that I always say is the longer your podcast can sit out in the world and you can market it and you get tons and tons of episodes. I'm coming up on a year now, so I think this is my 49th episode. The longer it can be out there, the more audience you're going to attract. And that's just the truth. So podcasting is not a short-term game. It's really a long game. If you want to start a podcast and you want to only do like 2 months, you're not going to attract the right audience, and you're really not going to attract a big audience. Picture yourself talking about this topic or a similar topic for years to come, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. What can you talk about for that long, and what will you enjoy? As I mentioned, your podcast topic can always shift a little bit as you grow, and honestly, it should. Your podcast topic should shift with your business or your personality or whatever it is, but you always want to have a core topic that you're always talking about, and you always want to have fun with it, because your audience knows when you're having fun, and that's why they come and listen to you. So these have been my 5 tips for choosing a podcast topic, and I really want you to get your podcast started. Don't let this hold you back. You probably already know what you want to talk about. Just bite the bullet and do it. So if you want help with starting your podcast, or you have any questions, you can go on my website, espressopodcastproduction.com. Under the resources tab, I have a free podcast checklist, and that's really the things that you need to know to start your podcast. So start there. If you want some help with starting your podcast, reach out to me before the end of the year, end of December 2022, and I will give you this special $200 off discount that I'm currently running. So this has been so fun. I hope it has helped you. And I'm always here to help you come up with a podcast topic. So let's talk, let's connect. Send me a DM. Cannot wait to talk to you. All right, I'll talk to you in next week's episode. Thank you for listening to the Employee to Boss podcast. If you made it to the end of this episode, I hope that you implement the actionable steps from this week's experts so you can get started with your business today. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Employee to Boss podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps more than you could ever imagine. Remember, a little progress each day leads to big results. We come out with a new episode every Tuesday. To access our show notes, transcripts, and courses, please check out espressopodcastproduction.com.